Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to join our show again. And today is a happy day. We have Christian to join our show. Hello, Christians. How you doing?
Good to see you, Vivian.
Yay, we're so happy and thank you so much for spending your time with us to share with us your story. And as a culture, it's very good to hear from our speaker to introduce about themselves. So, Christians, would you please share with us a bit about yourself?
Oh, wow. I'm a 46-year Austrian who lives in the UK, is married to a Kenyan. That kind of gives, I guess, a first good glimpse of what I am.
Oh, okay. And how about your passion of work and your current focus for work?
So I'm a professor, yeah. One of the great things about being a professor is that you can more or less do what you want. And I mean that sort of, in the most positive way. You have a question you're interested in, you're going to spend the next few years exploring that question. It's a bit like an entrepreneur with maybe less of the upsides on the salary side, but also not the risk, yeah. Well, we have fixed salary, yeah. And so that's really quite cool, I think.
Did you choose the majors in business during your university time?
No, not at all, actually. No, I studied history mainly. I really came to this later. My PhD was in business history, so I'm a bit of an unlikely strategy professor, I guess.
Wow, Kristen, uh, you've been having a phenomenal achievements. So we're gonna allow us to travel in time. All right. So Vivian and I will bring you to a younger version of Kristen. When we was young, Vivian wanted to become a singer. Okay, and then she sings well, but life didn't give her any chance to perform on the stage. And then I wanted to become an astronaut, but life also didn't give me any chance to wear the astronaut suit and jump on different planet. Not even close. Okay, so Christian, when you was young, what did you what did you want to do when you grow up, though?
So I definitely didn't want to become a singer. I come from a rather musical family where my granddad, my great granddad, they were all organists in church, but I wasn't, any good. So I even remember one of my aunts once gave me some, as a fun, yeah, as a little joke, she gave me some sing pearls that what you give to birds to kind of, just make fun of my inability to sing. So that was not on my list anywhere. Um, I have to remember actually. I think I want to become a teacher. In my family there is lots of teachers. Both my parents were teachers. Seven aunts are teachers, and it was a career where I thought they really enjoyed what they're doing, and that inspired me. So I'm kind of 100% sure, but I think I want to become a teacher, which is not entirely different what I ended up doing.
So
You're lucky.
you're lucky because our
So I
449.
have to say it's a lot easier, sorry to interrupt, it's a lot easier to teach adults. I definitely don't want to be a high school teacher or primary school teacher. It's struggling enough to handle young children and have to do that with other children. I mean, no way.
Christian, earlier I was saying that out of 449 person, only a handful of a few of our speakers were able to do what they wanted to do, since they were young. So, like you wanted to become a teacher, and actually all the dots connected backward, and then you now, and been a teacher teaching for a long time, right? So, congratulations for having the dream come true. So,
Even though, for professors, I think it's a common misconception that the teaching is a relatively small part of our job. The vast majority of our work is typically research. And it varies by country, but certainly that's true for the more highly ranked universities because the reputation of the universities rests on the research produced by people working in these institutions. Hence, that's really, very crucial and important. And I teach, obviously, and I love the teaching. But I would say probably the research side is even slightly more rewarding for me.
uh, Christian, earlier you said that when you study university, you study arts, but not business. Now you're teaching like strategy. So tell us how that, how everything begins, though.
Yeah, so it might sound more dramatic than yeah, it was. It was small, step by step things. My degree was in history and theology. I then did my PhD in history, but I specialized in business history. So, it was sort of slowly edging in that direction. Once I was done, I spent a short period, half a year, working for a consulting firm in Germany, but decided I'd like to return to university. And what I've done for my PhD is I looked at the historic development of corporate culture in Shell, Siemens, and Daimler. And as I sort of did that, one of the things that happened once is I met Ari Refois, who was the head of the strategy or planning group, already it was called, in Shell in the 90s, I think. Yeah, and he has written this very successful book about long-living organizations that linked to this research that I'd done for my PhD, but took it beyond just sort of the cultural world, his work, And I thought I'd like to pursue that further. Ari really encouraged me. He was saying, there's not a lot of stuff that has been done in this space. He obviously had written a book. There was a really successful US book by Jim Collins and Jerry Porras called Built to Last in the 1990s. I think it might have been the best-selling business book of the 90s even. And less so with focus on Europe. So I decided by going back to university, I want to look into how companies succeed in the long run, and European companies in particular. As I, try to set this up, what you do is you apply for funding for this that goes to various institutions to, hopefully fund this application. And you need somebody more senior who is on board with these projects. I went back to this group or department in the university that helps you with these applications, and they suggested that on top of the history professor who was my advisor during my PhD, Franz Mattis, it would make sense to also find a second professor from the business school. So there was one professor I've read something about before, Hans Hinterhuber, and I went to him, approached him, and he really loved the idea. And he said, you do this, and if you get funding, you can join my group here. So that's kind of how I then made one step closer to the business world. Studied this stuff, spent some period in Harvard doing this work as well, and then eventually was not directly linked to that, but somebody who visited Innsbruck, that was the university where I was at one point, sort of as we talked, he pointed out that I know a lot about the oil industry. During my PhD, I spent the majority of that time sitting with Shell in the Hague offices, and he thought maybe we can do some research on this. And then we linked out to a professor in Dartmouth College, Connie Helfert, and eventually I got funding from somewhere else and was able to spend a couple of years out there, which was then I think the final sort of transition into the business world, as I did some classes as well during that period to bring me up to speed on things like statistics, where previously I had no clue, and got myself really into depths of this. Also, I have to say, Connie Helfert, that professor in Dartmouth who helped me out there, she really took me under her wings. Yeah. So without her guidance and mentorship, things would have never played out the way they did.
So your first book is an endurance success, right? It's related to the works that you've been researched on the thesis, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the sort of stuff that I was talking about right now. Yeah, so that piece of work I've done from Innsbruck with some funding, but spending some time in HPS as well for that. That was the first book, exactly. Yeah.
And what happened to the second book? Tell us, how did you start writing the book about open strategy, though?
So that one also was a bit of I guess a coincidence. Life is full of these happy coincidences, and in a way, one of the core ideas of open strategy is that you enable happy coincidences. My life, I think, has many of these happy coincidences. So in this case, the way it got started was between Julia Hautz, Kurt Matzler, and Stefan Friedrich von den Eichen. Julia and Kurt, they're both professors in Innsbruck. Stefan is the managing director of a consulting firm in Germany, IMP, And this consulting firm has helped companies to open up their strategy for quite a few years. Have done hundreds of projects, really. They wanted to write a book, the three of them. I knew all of them really well throughout the work, particularly Julia and Kurt. We have worked for, wow, I would say 15 years or longer, on various different projects together. So, they wanted to bring me into this as well, as they knew that, I've written this other book before, Enduring Success, and they thought, it'd be kind of fun to work together. When they first approached me, I was pretty skeptical. I thought, really, strategy, opening up, isn't that something for the senior managers? But I was intrigued enough to at least, be open-minded to explore a bit more, join some workshops organized by the consulting firm. Then we started to talk to other companies who did that. And slowly, I really, from a skeptic, I turned into a prophet. I just thought this was phenomenally well, this stuff. Really cool. And, then we started to write the book. Book was received better than we ever dreamt of. So I guess we really hit the nerve that this is a way of how organizations can be smarter about creating their strategy. And, I'm glad I had this conversation in Munich and managed to convince me to join.
Hey, Christian, how can you keep open-minded on a topic that you were skeptical about at the beginning, and then spend years on, to research about that, run the assessment, and write a book about that? Tell us.
One thing probably one of the big factors was that I really trusted the people who approached me, and I think that's that sense of advice typically in life, that you work with people who you feel very comfortable, you trust. There's always downs in projects, so at least you have fun with that. In academia, we usually work with other people, and some people try to work with people who really sort of over achievers and very strong, and that can work or cannot work, because you don't necessarily know if you personally glitch with this person. I've always taken the approach that I first get to know people, and when it turns out that we get along well, that we're on the same page, then we might start working together, but not sort of jump into it straight away. So I think that was one really important component of why I was prepared to go in this direction. The other thing, I always like things that are a bit unusual and maybe don't make sense initially. I do that in my more hardcore academic work as well, where I always like settings that are out of the ordinary. For example, I have a PhD student who is Japanese, and with her and another professor, Cheng Wei Liu, we are using data from Japanese mangas to explore how creators either are driven by past performance to do similar things or different things, but it's sort of an unusual setting for, I guess, a business project. That in itself, I think, makes the project interesting, that we do take data from somewhere others wouldn't go.
So pick information from nowhere, and then start make sense of that is making you guys feel interesting and keep you the energy on doing that for a long time, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Hey, Christian, since you transformed from a person skeptical about open strategy and then starting to realize about the beauty side of having the strategy open and publicly shared, tell us about that, because to us, strategy for so many companies, so many leaders, so many managers are a secret that put into a vault, right? And now your theories are in the reverse way. Can you share with us about your findings?
Sure. Strategy making has two problems in general. The first problem is that ideas are, they look all the same after people work together for years. Everyone starts to be on the same page. The leadership finds it difficult to think very differently and dramatically different. There's always this sort of industry logic that overrides everything. and you might have an idea, or an individual has an idea, but then the feedback that comes is, well, but it doesn't work here. So where do you get fresh ideas? You need to break out from the usual crowd in order to find fresh ideas. The second big problem in strategy making is the execution side, and it's probably the even bigger problem. It's the less sexy part of strategy making, but the majority of strategies fail during execution. Lots of surveys and studies on this. Numbers vary, but somewhere between 50 and 90% of strategic failures are associated with something going wrong in execution. And if you involve people in the strategy making, then first of all, you're able to iron out some of the potential roadblocks. People who work on the front end, they can tell you already, well, certain aspects of what you have in mind will not work out here for whatever reason. So you can make adjustments before you move into executing something that is just not feasible. And people being involved, they become, more enthusiastic, become champions of an idea rather than, well, another thing I've been told I had what doesn't really make my life easier here, so I will just try to undermine it. For that, for these two reasons, fresh ideas and helping you with execution, including a much wider range of people into the strategy making is just a logic thing to do.
So if we want to start to open and our strategy, where can we take the baby steps to starting to steering our business into that direction, Christian?
So I like that you put it as baby steps, because that's really smart. I don't want to suggest that you've never done this before and let's just open up everything. Start with maybe a project or a small business where you anticipate maybe potential disruption, because that's where you really need fresh ideas. That's where then those fresh ideas will depart from what you have been doing before, hence you might get more resistance. And as you do so, and you learn how to run this, then you can move it up to maybe a bigger part of the business. Dr. Oetker, a German company that produces food, has, for example, started with a project in their cereal business, which is a smaller business. And as they picked up some experience and as they saw how it works, that's when they then started to do this also in the pizza business. And that's, the pizza business is now their core business. It's the biggest business that they have. That's a really sensible thing. The second thing I would advise is, we do not suggest that you turn your company to democracy. It's still, the leadership calls the shots. Hence, leadership needs to be on board on this. If the leaders don't like it, then there's not much point in opening up the strategy because it will not work. They need to be fully on board.
And Christian, I read an article about open strategy, right? And they say that we also invite a lot of people outside of organization to come into the senior meeting so that we can form the strategy together, including competitors. Is that a practice that used how can that practice be used actually in real life?
So it depends, is my answer. I like to think about strategy in different phases. So you have a phase where you generate new ideas, you have a phase where you sort of fine-tune and formulate strategy, and you have a phase where you execute your strategy, where you need to communicate it. And in each of these phases, you will probably have a different composition of participants. In the first phase, in the idea generation phase, that's the one where involving the largest diversity of people, including a lot of outsiders, is probably the most beneficial, because that's when you want to think outside the box. That's where you want to get really different type of ideas. And the advantage is, in this phase, you don't necessarily have to reveal that much about what in the end you intend to do. So involving outsiders, including competitors, is much less of a problem. When it goes to the extreme of this spectrum, we have seen, as we did the work for our book, that, for example, the US Navy has previously done an open strategy game where people could just sign up and take part. And people who come with backgrounds that are potentially in competition with the Navy will probably find ways to participate in this game as well. Some checks on security, etc. but were pretty light touch on it. What's more, once they have done this exercise, they publish the results. So, everyone can read what came out from this engagement and what the sort of big potential trends that people think might affect the Navy. What they did not do is they didn't tell anybody what exactly they will be doing themselves with these results. And here you have the full benefit of opening up. It's not as if somebody can take advantage of what they find out, because no one knows what the Navy is doing. Here, that's beneficial. When you now talk about the more nitty-gritty part of formulating your strategy, I would be a bit more selective. You could potentially also involve some outsiders, but you might do that in more of a workshop setting where you carefully choose those outsiders. They will sign non-disclosure agreements. So it's a bit more of what you typically do when you work with consultants as well. You get other voices into the room, but it's not outside your control who is actually in that room.
If that's the case, once a strategy is formulated, right, how would that be best communicate across, the whole organization, though?
So one thing that we have seen that works really well if you want to have more of an open approach is strategy jams. And you can think about this a little bit like big online conference type settings where you have discussion streams, and in these discussion streams, people will then have conversations about certain things and what it means for them. Steelcase is a big US company producing office furniture, and they did one of those things at the stage when the big headlines for the strategy were formulated, but there's still a lot of wiggle room of what does it mean a bit further down the line. And as they engage in that process, you get the full vibrance of people participating. You also, contrary to what they really anticipated, did get a few very fresh ideas that they introduced corporate-wide. So, for example, one of the participants pointed at the benefits they had from involving customers in the design phase of new aspects of furniture, and less so because the design was so unusual. It's more that the big customers really valued having this opportunity to participate in this process, and then they roll that out more widely in the company. So even though they didn't want to have any sort of wider corporate implications from the process, it just turned out to be the smart thing to do that, so they did.
Christian, if we will talk about strategy in two spectrum, one side is really, really close and then not disclosed to anybody, only keep secret to a handful of people in organization, and on the other spectrum is open, and then open to why open to everybody, right? Where do you see normal companies right now at that scale, though?
Well, anywhere in the extremes and the betweens. It depends a lot on your situation. You need to obviously be more careful in some situations. There might be even legal reasons why you cannot open. If we talk about an M&A situation, for example, often you are not allowed to have any openness in situations like this. Then the other extreme is you're facing this entirely unprecedented situation. You have no expertise in your firm, and you want to engage widely with picking up ideas. So you're going to do it as much as you can. I would never go as far as sort of in the end we have a vote, and whatever comes out from the vote, that's what we will do. We did find companies who went to this sort of unscrutinized extreme, where it was a company in Germany that was trying to create a movement around a beloved old recipe of a cola. The old recipe was from Africola, that was sort of being phased out. So they started what was called a premium cola, but it just was unruly then, and people started to talk about all sorts of things. There was no clear direction, and that whole initiative did not work. Yeah, you still always need clear structures. You need a guidance. You need to have moderators in any of these open processes, and you have to have a leadership who makes then final decisions, mindful of the input, but not, being entirely obliged to that either.
Christian, everything will have a pro and cons, right? To our opinions, that includes also the open strategy. So, as you are expert in open strategy, is there any shortfalls that we need to, in this approach that leaders needs to be aware when they implement open strategy? Can you share that?
Yeah, so I guess, one sensitive area is clearly this balance between secrecy, proprietary information, and what do I open up. And that, through design, can be managed really well. So partly of, whoever you invite will have an impact on that. You can do this purely internal. You could do it internally with representation from different parts of the business, but smaller. That helps you to keep things closer to your chest. And you can then also regulate this by deciding what you share and what you do not share with outside groups or whoever participates. It can go as far as, you dress something up in a way that it looks really quite different from what you use it for. And I'll give you a nice example for that. A few years ago, there was a call in a public forum to ask people to help developing an algorithm that helps with the tracking of bisons across U.S. national parks. People post pictures in national parks, and when you post these pictures, there's automatic some metadata about locations, etc., with these pictures that you post. So, developing an algorithm for that can help potentially to track those movements. And we talked to the organizer, who was really pleased with the input that they got, helped them to solve the puzzle that they were looking for, faster than usual and cheaper than usual. But as it turns out, this actually had nothing to do with the protection of bison. It was an initiative organized by the intelligence community in the United States. It was in 2014 when Russia had occupied Crimea. It was really, they were looking for an algorithm that can help them to use social media posts or photos and other things to track potential movements of troops and sort of military forces in Crimea. So something entirely different, but no one knew that. Yeah, so they dressed it up in a way, found a solution for that problem without anybody who participated ever knowing. Now they had to, I think, in this particular context, it's very sensitive. So imagine if they had asked, so hey, we want to find out how Russian troops are moving. Can you help us to develop an algorithm? Then there's also people on the Russian side who obviously know how to handle a computer. So they might submit lots of algorithms that are actually faulty and give wrong results, but really look good. Or they might submit something that is really good, but they know exactly how this algorithm works and then can adjust their own strategies accordingly. So, in that situation, you had to take a relatively unusual approach, I guess, of how you open up, but still benefit from that openness.
So, Christian, can I ask you about the book Enduring Success? It's a bit about...
It's a while back, I hope you read this. I think 2011 is when it was published.
Yeah, so it's a lot about history that we can learn from the outstanding corporations, right? So if you can summarize some of the characteristics that these outstanding companies have to endure success, and whether you see path through the COVID pandemic situations, whether those characteristics still solid to carry on the future time.
Yeah. So, to answer your second question first, one thing we need to keep in mind, I was looking at organizations over 100 years plus. So there was quite a bit of drama that happened during that period already. 2 world wars, 2 oil crises, emergence of entirely new technology. Yeah? Sure, COVID dramatic, but probably not quite as extreme as the 2 world wars. Hence, with those things that emerged from the work that I did on looking at these organizations stood fine and solid across other dramatic events, there's a good chance that they still hold today. Now let me get to some of these points that came out from the work that I did. So I think the core overall gist from that work was that organizations, to survive in the long run, tend to be relatively conservative. It's maybe a little bit more about avoiding the biggest mistakes rather than being able to jump on every opportunity that comes along. Now, of course, if you miss substantial shifts that change the entire economy, that would be too extreme. But you can be a little bit later sometimes. This becomes highlighted in the first big sort of aspect that I want to flesh out, or that I fleshed out at the time, where when you look at sort of this balance between doing something new, being strong in exploration, versus being really good in executing and getting sort of ideas converted into something real, the balance for the long-term organization shifts more towards the second one. So they sometimes actually came a little bit later to the game, where as far as new big ideas are concerned. And the nice example was Zantac. That's an anti-ulcer medication developed by Glaxo, and that was ready for market. I think it was 6 years after there was a relatively similar medication already in the market. That was Tagamet by SmithKline, with then posing the question, how can you win with a Me Too product, really? And you can do so if you're really smart about the execution side, which Glaxo was. Yeah. So Glaxo did three things to excel on the execution side. The first thing they did is they set a price that was higher rather than lower for Tagamet. That sounds really unusual for a Me Too product, but if you set the higher price, intuitively you give this intuition to customers that the quality is higher. So, it's a smart move in that sense, that just emotionally we send the right message. The second thing they did is they were stressing those benefits that they had really strongly. So in a way, they perceived some of the disadvantages of being second as an advantage. So we don't have to explain to our customers the principles of how our medication works. We only have to convince them of these additional benefits that you get when you take Zantac rather than Tagamet. One of the main things was that you had to take lower dosages. There were also indications around less side effects, but limited medical proof at this point in time. So, with that, they could really work. And the final thing they did is they were just super aggressive on the marketing side. They had strong sales force in the United States, where they didn't have enough people to do this. They partnered with Roche, and the combined sales was big enough. With all those things combined, higher price, stressing the benefits that you have, and an aggressive sales force, they turned this Me Too product to the most successful pharma product that had been on the market up to this point in time. Pretty phenomenal. So the execution side, I would say, is at least as important as the innovation side.
Wow. Well, Christian, thanks for sharing that. And then I will take it. I'll follow up with that question. But now we can move into the open strategy book, because we talk about the workforce that come into the people, the generation come to the workforce these days is very complex, right? They're new, they're young, they're asking for transparency, they're asking for a lot of open in communications and stuff. And I do see that the traditional management and strategy gonna face with a lot of challenges from the young generation coming to the workforce, and the future seems to be in the open strategy. Where in your research was there any evidence that back that up, Christian?
Yeah, so I mean, we certainly see this trend that more and more companies do open up, and I agree with you that that is partly a response to what employees demand, young people in particular, but I think also the older generation is just generally being more used to having a voice. If you have an opinion, you can go on Twitter and you air it these days. So why is it that in the workforce I would not have that kind of voice? It would just be unusual. I guess, in many countries, there is an increasing difficulty to hire enough people to do all the jobs. The economy is, struggling on some fronts, but overall is still in a period of growth in many places. So how do you find enough staff? Yeah, you have this big retirement wave coming, at least in the Western world, where you will need to find new people to do so. So you need to make your place attractive, and many people expect more than just a job and a salary package. They would want to do something that they enjoy by being able to contribute to the big things the company does. Well, no, there's a likelihood that the enjoyment factor goes up.
Wow. Well, Vivian, do you have any other questions for Christian?
Yeah, so it's similar questions like what you mentioned earlier. Seem like conservative is something that keep company long lasting, and then we have the open strategies. So in your research, are these conservative company are opening up to the future? How you feel that conservative level for them? Yeah.
So for it's also good advice to revise your own opinions every few years. And since the earlier research was more than 10 years ago, in a way the open strategy approach is also it's a new perspective I have on things. I do likewise. I think see lots of those large organizations that are traditionally quite conservative start to experiment with openness. And just because you open up, we talked about this earlier, it doesn't mean that, you open up everything and radically change everything overnight. You can still do that in, smart, small steps and, make these adjustments step by step. That's still a very smart way to go about this.
Christian, we have two last questions for you for today. And the first question is about thinking, because we love thinker, okay? And then you are one of the person that in the Thinkers 50 said the future thinker, right? And your works involve a lot of works with other great thinkers, and then your job involve a lot of thinking process in between also. And Vivian and I in the quest to help people to improve their ability to think, because we believe that our thinking capability these days is diminishing, not increasing at all. So so our question for you is, Christian, how have you been helping yourself to expand your ability to think? Can you share that secret?
Sure, reading. The answer is really reading. This idea goes back, not surprisingly for an academic, but it does go back to Benjamin Franklin, who said, set aside an hour a day for reading at least. And we see many very successful people who clearly have a business life that keeps them busy to still do that. Oprah Winfrey is known for that. Bill Gates is. I'm not sure if you watch Inside Bill's Brain, the Netflix series that kind of follows him around. And wherever he goes, he carries a big canvas bag full of books. So if Bill Gates has enough time to read, then I'm sure you should have enough time as well to do so. You will get stumbled across fresh ideas. You will, find things that you would normally not think about. The second thing I'd really encourage people is try to widen your horizon by talking with people from other places as well. Perspectives are different from different places of the world, and if you lock yourself into a small echo chamber of just like-minded people who have never sort of wanted to perceive things from a different angle, then you're not likely to widen your horizon. You obviously do that, with your own podcast here, where you reach out to people from all over the world, and that's just sort of something we should all naturally do. Try and find opportunities to connect, to talk to people with relatively different perspectives from our own.
And thanks for joining so that you can expand our perspective and our thinking also, Christian. All right. Our last question is about the future. So we knew that when you want to be a teacher since you were young, and then you study like art and histories, and then you move into the the PhD in the business history, right? And you're teaching, and we want to know in the future a little bit from now. Christian, is there anything that exciting you are working on, and you would like to share with Vivian and myself so that we can celebrate with you in advance?
No. So I still do a lot of work on this openness. One thing that I do at the moment that I think is quite cool. I'm looking a little bit into the role of emotions in the strategy making process, where the kind of core idea is that depending on how we communicate and converse about different strategies, that will have a higher or lower chance to resonate with people. A bit too early to say what comes out of that, but happy to share as we know more.
Wow. Let us know when you find out more, okay?
Sure.
Hey Christian, thanks a lot for being so generous to spend your time with us and the audience of the program, to share your stories and the works that you do. And we love to see you back in Vietnam one day. You're gonna have a new friends, Vivian and myself, and then we will be so honored to take you and your family around town when you come back. Okay. Second is that we wish you have all the resources, all the supports that you can continue doing your works at the best of you all can do. And thanks a lot for joining our program. Okay.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye.
Bye, Christians.
Christian.
You have a wonderful day. Happy weekend ahead.
All right. You too.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Thanks, Vivian.